In an effort to begin to develop a working context for the social settings that many believers might face after reading this book of Galatians, this study that I wrote, I've decided to entertain 10 common questions or Christian objections to the notion of Torah observance for Gentile Christians. Indeed, in my experience of speaking at various Christian churches and Bible studies as a Messianic Jew, I have been asked these exact questions or variations of these questions by genuine and well-meaning Christians, no doubt, but questions which oftentimes stop Gentile Christians from embracing the notion of Torah observance in their lives. So, the questions are real. The dialogue is real. My answers are real. So I hope that you'll read along with me and contemplate the questions and answers with me, with that understanding that I put myself in the position of those who might read my study and scratch their head and say, Ariel, that sounds good, sounds plausible, but what about this? What about that? What about this verse that I read? What about what my pastor said about this particular passage? Things like that. And that's where these questions were born out of. The objections themselves and the subsequent answers are not exhaustive. They're only meant to serve as the beginning of a dialogue between those believers who embrace Torah as a lifestyle and those believers who do not, and also as a primer to this study on Galatians and Paul. For ease of understanding, this preface was actually designed to stand alone as its own mini-study on Torah observance. These 10 questions were originally presented as a live Bible study to a Christian men's group in Boulder, Colorado in 2013, a few days before I moved to South Korea. So I think for this first week, this first session, we'll probably only tackle the first 2 questions, and we'll save the rest, the other 8 questions, or we'll just go question by question as we move along. But I think the first 2 will get us started, and we'll be able to dialogue from that. So let me start with the first question. The question says, what is Torah? And you'd be amazed. For those of you who are in Messianic circles, you might be wondering to yourself, Ariel, why would you start with a question, what is Torah? Everyone knows what Torah is, right? Well, surprisingly, no. In my experience as a Torah teacher and as a Bible teacher, Torah teacher, for about 15 years now, going on 20 years. 15 years at my current congregation and about 5 years before that at a different congregation, at my own synagogue. I have found that many well-meaning Christians believe the Torah to be something other than the Bible that they actually have. They believe the Torah maybe to be an extra body of literature that only Jewish people have, or maybe the Torah is an ancient scroll written in Hebrew that only synagogues have, and that Christians really don't have access to the Torah. Actually, then the answer might be a bit surprising. The answer is, Torah is God's teaching, but Torah is also law. Torah is actually the first 5 books of your Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy. That's Torah. So, using this comprehensive historical definition, that it's God's teaching, the whole Bible is really Torah, because all of it is God's thoughts that have been breathed out by Him, right? Everything from Genesis to Revelation is really Torah, even though most Jews don't refer to anything past, say, Deuteronomy as Torah proper. Recall that Paul's words to Timothy in 2 Timothy 3:16 through 17, quote, all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, end quote, as I chop the verse off there. All of God's words are Torah. All of God's words are His teaching. However, the word Torah, I understand people who might disagree slightly with my definition here. The word Torah most often simply refers to the first 5 books of the Bible, so I would call that Torah proper.